thank you for coming out for this event tonight. It is an experience that I hope we take, and I know we'll take a lot from in terms of learning about extending humanity to everyone and being more inclusive. My name is Neil Lester. I am a professor here at Arizona State, well, not here at Arizona State University, at Arizona State University on the Tempe campus. I'm a professor of English, but I started Project Humanities at Arizona State University to bring more people together around humanities, but beyond disciplines, to bring people around humanity. And humanity is not about disciplines, but about how we see each other, how we treat each other, and how we reflect on our roles in the world. So this event is sponsored by Project Humanities, but it's a wonderful partnership with the Arizona Commission for the Deaf and the Hard of Hearing. And I have Michelle Michaels, who is the brain person behind this, because we started to talk about lots of things and we said, let's not just the two of us talk about it, let's talk about it with a community of other folks. So that brings us here, but there is something I want to acknowledge before we get started, and that is a land acknowledgement, that we don't want to be just a performance. We don't want it to be just a performance. We want to acknowledge that Project Humanities sits on ancestral lands of indigenous nations. We thank the native communities of the Salt River Valley, including the Akamo Otham and the Peepash Nations, who have inhabited this place for centuries and whose stewardship of the land and waterways allows us to be here now. We recognize that land acknowledgements alone are not enough. Project Humanities is therefore committed to supporting Native communities by promoting and learning about Indigenous histories, cultures, and values. We're also committed to creating critical environments where Native individuals and communities are welcomed and valued. And we are committed to collaborating with Indigenous nations in this region to protect Native sovereignty, governance, and jurisdiction over their territories. So welcome, welcome, welcome. We have spent a lot of time trying to make this event as inclusive as it could possibly be. And in the process of doing that, we have also learned. So even before this program started, many of us are learning about what we don't know, and we're learning that we can always do more and do better. So please accept the program that we're offering tonight in the spirit that it is being offered. And if there are slights or mistakes, charge it to our minds and not to our hearts. We have people on Zoom, so I want people to be aware that we do have audiences joining us virtually, and we have people in the room. And I'll say that Michelle Michaels has been a supporter of Project Humanities and a friend for a few years through various capacities. We're also neighbors. But when Michelle is teaching me stuff and we're exchanging information, I get excited about that, and it brings me joy. So this brings me great joy, Michelle, that you accepted the task of facilitating and putting together this panel to teach us and to help us see and participate in greater community. So thank you very much. And I will turn it over to you, and then I'll come back at the end of this and we will wrap it up. All right. Thank you. Please welcome Michelle Michaels.
Thank you, Dr. Lester. It's such a pleasure to know you as a friend and a colleague. I want to also send a big thank you to the ASU Project Humanities staff, running the camera, running Zoom, all of that. Also want to thank our service providers. We have 6 American Sign Language interpreters who are licensed by the state of Arizona here tonight. 4 of them are in person, 2 of them are virtually on Zoom. We also have a nationally certified CART captioner tucked away over here in the corner of the room, Tracy. And so we cannot have access as deaf, hard of hearing, or deaf blind people without our service providers. So we're really grateful to them. Also the panelists that I've invited here to speak. And last but not least, the ACDHH staff. My team here at ACDHH that I work with are phenomenal. from Deputy Director Carmen Greensmith, who is standing in the back of this room in a beautiful blue jacket, to yeah, there's just to so many more in our organization who have helped organize this tonight. So with that, I want to introduce our panelists, and I'm just going to start with some brief bios, and then turn it over to some Q&A. And towards the probably in about 45 minutes, I'm going to keep an eye on the clock. 50 minutes or so, we're going to open this up to questions from the audience. We have a pretty good audience here in person, but also people on Zoom can also type in your questions, and the ASU staff will manage that and feed that to us. The accommodations that we have besides American Sign Language interpreting for myself and for Minerva is hard of hearing like me. So we have these little iPad tablets here, which show us the captioning, real live human captioning, as well as you can see that displayed in the room. So to turn this over, I want to introduce Minerva Gutierrez. Minerva is a native of Chihuahua, Mexico. Her hearing loss started in her late teens. In 2016, she received bilateral cochlear implants. She graduated from the Institute of Technology in Chihuahua, Mexico, with a bachelor's degree in industrial engineering and manufacturing. Later, she earned an MBA from the University of Phoenix using CART captioning to understand what was said in the classes. Now she is a charter member and treasurer of the Audible Talkers Toastmasters group, the first in the nation that offers accommodations during their meetings. Minerva is in the process of becoming a peer mentor for disabled individuals at the local Ability 360 Center. And then next to Minerva, and this is totally a coincidence that we all wore the same color tonight, Lisa Furr, bright minds, right? Lisa Furr is a native of Tucson, Arizona, an old friend of mine as well. She is a deaf lesbian and is married. She earned a Bachelor of Science degree in Business Administration with a minor in Entrepreneurial Studies from Gallaudet University, and holds a master's degree in Organizational Management from the University of Phoenix. Currently, she is a lecturer teaching American Sign Language and Deaf Studies classes at the University of Arizona. She held various positions with the National Association of the Deaf, Arizona Association of the Deaf, Rainbow Alliance of the Deaf, and Deaf Women United, as well as she served as a commissioner on the Arizona Commission for the Deaf and the Hard of Hearing Commission, and participated on the Interpreter Licensure Committee. Oh, I'm glad that Andrew's bio is not going to be as long as Lisa. Andrew Cohen, sitting next to Lisa, is a co-founder of the DeafBlind Camp of Texas and DeafBlind Retreat of Arizona. Andrew adds to the intersectional experience of what it means to be a deaf-blind man in Arizona, and he'll speak a little bit more as well as to his identities. So, with that said, let me ask the first question to the panel. And again, panel members, speak up whenever you want. Watch each other so we know who's going to speak next. But the first question is, how do you identify yourself?
I'll take that first question. Thank you. My name is Minerva Gutierrez. Oh, okay. Can you hear me now? No.
Let's see if is this working? Maybe a little bit closer to the mouth.
Thank you very much, Michelle. Okay. Again, my name is Minerva Gutierrez. I am a Hispanic female in her mid-50s. I have short brown hair and I'm wearing glasses. They have dark rims. I identify myself as hard of hearing, but in reality, I use 2 cochlear implants that allow me to hear pretty well. But when I take them off, I can't hear anything, which is when I go to sleep or when I am sleeping. I work as a quality manager at Berry Global, and this is in the manufacturing field. In my job, I am responsible for the quality of the product, ensure that it meets regulatory, customer, and company requirements. I really, really love my job. Thank you.
I will go and, oh, okay, I'll go next. First, thank you for having me here. I'll go ahead and give a descriptor of myself before I answer your question. I'm a white woman with brown curly hair. I've got glasses, earrings, and a wine-colored shirt that matches all of the other ladies up here. The background behind me is an orange wall with a large TV. And again, I am so happy to be here. I think the last time we were here for a committee meeting was maybe 2019, 2020. So it's good to be back. As far as my identity goes, I am a 5th generation deaf woman. I am a lesbian. I have a wife who is an interpreter herself. I am also a deaf interpreter. So we are a family of interpreters. I am a Christian woman. And I wanted to talk a little bit about these labels that you're hearing tonight. Minerva said she was hard of hearing. I said that I'm deaf. I mentioned that my wife is hearing. So a hearing person is someone who can hear. For people in the audience and people on Zoom, if you can hear the interpreter speaking, you've now got a new label. You are called a hearing person. Hearing people know about other hearing people, right? That's the world that you live in. So hopefully that clarifies.
Hi there. My name is Andrew Cohen. This is my name sign, an A on the chest. I want to thank ASU and the Arizona Commission for the Deaf and Hard of Hearing for inviting us to be here this evening. I am honored. As far as my identities go, I am deaf-blind, which means that I have Usher's syndrome, which means I have a tunnel vision. I do not have any peripheral vision. I primarily communicate using American Sign Language. In the evenings when the lights are off, that's usually when I start communicating through tactile means. Now, I'm originally from Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. Go black and gold. Grew up in Pittsburgh, and then I moved to Maryland to work for the government there. In Maryland is where I met my wife. My wife is hearing, and she is a sign language interpreter. We moved to Texas, or she moved to Texas as I was pursuing her, and we stayed there for 12 years. We again moved to Phoenix, Arizona, when she got up and moved. I followed her here. I think we're here for a while. We've been here for a few years now. I work for the investment firm Vanguard. At Vanguard, I am what's called a technical lead, meaning I lead a group of software engineers. That's what I do for my day job. What else? Oh, I haven't given my descriptor quite yet. I am a white male. Let's see. Wearing a black shirt that has the sleeves rolled up. I have a dark beard. I'm wearing a vest that I believe is blue, and this tie is what, Lisa? Is it kind of blue and black? Yeah, okay. All right. Thanks to my wife for picking my outfit out for me this evening. She does a great job. And thank you. Next question. I'll turn it over to you, Michelle.
Okay, it's a little far away, so I couldn't quite see that feedback from the audience. Yeah, maybe we'll pass a note like in class. Okay. Higher up here. Okay, for Minerva. Okay, got it. Thank you. Access. It's all about access and finding out where the mics work. Hey, thank you to my panel for reminding me to describe myself. Gosh, I work here at the Commission for the Deaf and the Hard of Hearing. I'm the hearing healthcare program manager. I manage hard of hearing programs and services. I am hard of hearing. I'm a white woman. I'm in my 60s. I have white hair, lovely purple wine colored blouse on. I wear glasses. We do these descriptions because we know that people who are blind or low vision, appreciate that kind of access. So I thank my panel for reminding me to do that. Okay, so we're going to hold our microphones close to our mouth. What are some awesome things about the culture or cultures in which you are a member?
How about this? Okay, yeah, I think I'm finding how this microphone works. Closer. Okay, thank you. What are awesome things about my culture? Well, I've had a hearing loss since I was a teenager. But in my culture, where I used to live in northern Mexico, everybody spoke very loud and they marked their consonants. That's how the people of Chihuahua are known. Sometimes they say that we're loud, rude, and very talkative people. So for somebody that was hard of hearing, it helped me understand better. But when I moved out of my hometown, I realized that not everybody spoke that loud. And that's when I realized that my hearing loss was greater than what I knew it was. Something else about my culture, even if I learned that I knew that I was hard of hearing or that I was losing my hearing, I lived in a place that there's really no natural resources. So everybody has to work outside their homes. There's a statistic that I read that 90% of the females in my hometown had a job outside their home. So for me, as somebody that was disabled, I knew that one way or another, I had to have a job. So I prepared for that. And here I am. Thank you.
This is Lisa. Minerva, it's interesting about that your Mexican culture sounds very similar to what people say about deaf culture. We are very direct to the point that people say that we're rude. We can be very expressive. So it's very similar, it seems. Now, as far as my cultures go, the first one that I'd like to talk about is being part of deaf culture. I think that some great things about it are the fact that the language is absolutely beautiful. We communicate with our hands. And depending on how we move our hands can mean a variety of different things. We can even play with words. Like I can spell cat and dog on 2 different hands at the same time. There are some very interesting things that we can do with our facial expression and our body language that doesn't really have a direct translation into English. So just like in English, we can have a play on words, in sign language, we can have a play on signs. And of course, being deaf is normal to me. I don't see any difference with, say having a baby and signing with it as it grows up, as opposed to hearing people having a baby and speaking with it as it grows up. In my family, my parents were the only people in my family to sign. My grandparents, aunts, uncles, cousins, they did not have communication access with us. There was a big barrier for communication, but I could sign with my parents, which was wonderful. It wasn't until, though, that I got to a deaf school that I was able to communicate with everyone and really thrived in that environment. I graduated from the deaf school and went to college. and have been working ever since. I think that a big part of deaf culture is the benefits, or what we call deaf gain, that come from being deaf. We are a collectivist community, a collectivist culture. So we really value the sharing of information and being together as a community.
This is Andrew. Now, it's funny that you mention a loud culture. You mention a blunt culture. As a deaf-blind culture, we got both of you beat because we're tactile. We are right there. We are having direct communication, touching the other person we're communicating with without abandon. And that's our culture. Touch is our language. Now, touch is also a universal language, meaning everyone understands that language. So if you're holding a baby, skin to skin is a very important factor when holding a baby. That's how you build that bond between a parent and a child. And as a deafblind person, that is natural to me. I'm able to bond with my child in that way. So that is something that is an important part of my culture, and I'm proud to be deafblind. Now, funny enough, I was born deaf and I didn't realize that I was deafblind until later in life, but touch was always an important part of my life. It was always an important part of my upbringing. I was always a tactile person. And looking back, I was like, oh, I already made these accommodations for myself far in advance, not knowing what the journey would be. So I want to thank the deafblind community for having the space for us as we enter the community. So I'm honored to be a part of the community.
And this is Lisa speaking. Can I add one more thing? Okay, great. So yeah, Andy brings up a great point. It doesn't matter the fact that, he was deaf first and became deafblind later, the fact that Minerva didn't lose her hearing until later, and the fact that even if we use any kind of assistive listening devices like hearing aids, I mean, we actually have a great advantage. For example, if there's an annoying noise or we have a headache after a long day and we don't want to try to figure out what sounds we're hearing, hearing people, you can't take your ears off. You can't filter out those sounds, but we just take off our cochlear implants, take off our hearing aids, and we have the peaceful, lovely world of silence. I did actually want to share one funny story, a way that being deaf was an advantage. When we were dating several years ago, we were at our second home in Bisbee. Bisbee is a small city about an hour and a half south of Tucson. It's a famous old mining town that's famous for its ghost stories. And one night, as we were sleeping, she's my wife now, but my girlfriend at the time, Heather, tapped me on the shoulder and signed, "Did you hear that? Do you hear that? It sounds like footsteps." And I looked, and our dog was barking. Obviously, there was something happening. She was convinced there was a ghost in the room. And you know what? It didn't bother me at all. I was like, great story. I'm going back to bed. She was up all night freaking out. So another way that having hearing loss is an advantage.
So when it comes to Ghostbusters, just call deaf people because they're not afraid of ghosts. Or call Lisa.
Yes, you don't even need the Ghostbusters. You just have the deaf community come save the day.
Love it. Well, this panel discussion is part of ASU's Project Humanities invisible disabilities discussion and dispelling the myths of invisible disabilities. And when you look at me, when you listen to my voice, you have no idea that I'm virtually deaf in my left ear and that I wear a hearing aid in my right ear. And so I put people where? To my right. And you don't know, looking at Minerva, that she has 2 cochlear implants. You don't know that Andrew and Lisa are deaf-blind for Andrew. If you see people signing, you might think, oh, that's an interpreter, when actually it's a deaf person. So it is an invisible disability. And with that, there are a lot of myths around what we can and cannot do. I mean, back in the day, Lisa can talk about, the lack of deaf education and all of that. So I just want to ask the panelists, what are some of the prevalent myths that you find regarding the community or communities that you represent?
Okay, I'll start. I'm hoping my microphone does work this time. A little bit more. Okay. So I work in manufacturing. And one of the greatest myths is that in fast-paced, high-volume manufacturing is not disability friendly. And in reality, there's a lot of opportunities there for all of us. Just that sometimes I feel that we're not in the right place or we're not talking to the right persons. And I am an example that accommodations help that person provide valuable work and a support for any company. Thank you.
This is Andrew. So one myth about the deaf-blind community, that is very prevalent is that deaf-blind people can't have a family. You can't be a parent if you are deaf-blind. You can't see, you can't hear, you can't be a parent. And that makes sense. But guess what? Well, there are a few myths I'm about to dispel. First, I am a deaf-blind father of a 2-year-old. I have a 2-year-old. I have a daughter. I have a beautiful daughter. So I know how to procreate as a deaf-blind person. Believe it or not, deaf-blind people are capable of procreation. I pursued my wife, and here we are today. Now, when it comes to my daughter, I can tell you that things can sometimes be a challenge. I do have to tailor my approach sometimes. There are other things, though, that are extremely easy for me. Like changing diapers are something that are so easy for me. I don't have to turn the lights on. I can do it any time of day or night, change the diaper quickly and move on with my day. But once my daughter started to learn how to walk, that presented some challenges because she loved to play peekaboo and she loved to hide. So sometimes I would be looking for her, and that became a bit of a challenge for us, but we learned our way. Deafblind people always wonder how deafblind people know when a baby is crying. Well, we, of course, use technology to accommodate our lives. I have a watch that notifies me when my daughter is crying. And so that way I can, of course, first have to find her and then make sure that everything is okay. Sometimes it can take a while. Like, okay, where is she? Where is she? Then I have to get my wife. I'm like, help me find her. Sometimes she's in the bathroom. So it happens. But I have a 2-year-old. She's a beautiful girl. I've had no issues so far, knock on wood. Been 2 years. Things are going well.
Yeah, this is Lisa. I can think of several myths. Andy was just talking about being a parent, and I was a foster mom for a long time. I was also a case manager with Child Protective Services, or excuse me, a case manager with Child Protective Services had some issues with us because not only were we deaf, but we were lesbians as well. And there was concerns about how we would communicate with the children, what kind of influence we would be on the children. And there, of course, wasn't the kind of technology that we have today. The kiddos that we were a foster family to were from Mexico. They were deaf, but had speech delays. They had not learned much language at all. And as soon as they came to our home, their language absolutely took off. Those kids ended up being able to speak English, Spanish, and sign in ASL. What we found was oftentimes when service providers or whomever working with our case had to get a hold of us, they would immediately call my wife, who can hear, and not call me directly. We would have to really force them or encourage them to treat me as a contactable person because they just were terrified to communicate with me. We had to make sure that all of our meetings had an interpreter that wasn't my wife. Obviously, my wife was there in a specific role as a foster parent, and she wasn't there to interpret. So we had to really fight those battles to get a professional interpreter into our meetings. And we've seen a lot of myths about deaf people marrying other deaf people and then having more deaf babies. But that, of course, has been proven untrue. 90% of deaf people are born to hearing parents. When my parents were pregnant, people would always ask, do you want a boy or a girl? And of course, they said, we just want a healthy baby. But really, in the old days, they wanted a boy first. That was a common thing for families back then.
This is Andrew. It's funny you mentioned your wife being an interpreter and potentially working in dual roles. I have a similar situation with my wife. People think, oh, your wife is sighted, she can hear, she can start interpreting for you, she can be your sighted guide at night, she can be all of these things for you instead of service providers. And of course, that is not the case. I draw a boundary there. She is my wife. When we go for services, I make sure that I get an SSP or transportation or an interpreter. But when she's with me, she is my wife and a mother. So I understand that struggle. And there are situations where we do, of course, sometimes cheat it just for a few minutes to get by, to make things work. But as long as everyone understands the rules and understands everyone's roles. But we do, of course, see resistance from doctors or from the workplace who don't want to provide accommodations for a variety of reasons. But we do have to be firm and be clear that she is my wife and she is not here to interpret. And, you know, and I can't bring my own mother to all of my appointments. So, yeah. So same thing goes for me and for my wife, Lisa.
This is Lisa. Actually, that brings up another myth about interpreters. And it's funny that we both have hearing wives that are interpreters, but it's important for people out there to know that deaf people don't just automatically live with interpreters. We don't just bring interpreters with us everywhere we go. You know, my mother was ill recently, and I had to bring her to lots of doctor's appointments in the hospital several times. We had to fight constantly for interpreters at these appointments. There is an Arizona state law that requires interpreters to be professional and certified and licensed. Obviously, Minerva here sitting next to me, I'm sure wherever you go, you're not expected to just magically have a cart provider that follows you everywhere, that from your house to your work. Same for deaf people and interpreters.
That is true. When I go to the doctor, I have to tell them, I need to see your face while you're talking to me. I need you to speak slower so I can understand you. And sometimes I have to repeat myself to the same person over and over. At work, I'm lucky that recent technology has been very helpful, especially when we're in meetings or virtual meetings also, that we have access to card or automated captioning services.
This is Lisa. It's great that we have that technology.
Yeah, it really does help. I depend on my hearing aids. I depend on being able to look at the person and lip read, face read, read their body language. Forget about it if you're behind me, I'm not going to hear you. So I depend on those things, automatic speech recognition, card providers, um, fairly fluent in sign language. Oh, somebody's daughter wants to come up and join. Andrew, your little girl, she is so cute.
That's
in-
her. She's mine.
You're on Zoom. This may be your first time. um, but you know,
Who knows? Bring her up. Get in the camera. Get in the shot. Hi, Mom.
well, yeah, service animals. We also, a lot of us have hearing dogs. And I have one as well, although she's quite old now, so she's retired. But I do, when you were talking about, pulling off our cochlear implants, being deaf, when my dog is snoring, I make sure to lay on my right ear because my left ear is my deaf ear, and I'm like, snore all you want, but I can't hear you. Oh gosh. Anyway, we were talking about some myths. Why do you think these myths about us, our communities, exist, and what do we do to counteract that information other than have one of these meetings every night?
This is Andrew. I think this is the perfect segue, perfect opportunity to mention this. Just 2 days ago, we got a report from our daycare or the school where our daughter goes. And it was an evaluation. It was an assessment of her typical development, looking at her walking, her of instruction. And one time there, about language development. And it said language development was just okay. And I showed the report to my wife, and we both had to laugh a little bit. Because in the column where it said comments, it said, we often have to get your daughter's attention to ask her to verbalize what she is trying to communicate. And we realized, my daughter does know how to communicate in spoken English, in sign language, and in tactile sign language. But sometimes if she is speaking in English and she doesn't know the word for something, she'll switch to sign language, and then she'll continue in sign language until she doesn't know a word, and she'll switch back to English or tactile sign language. But of course, when I'm communicating with her, I understand everything she's saying. She'll sometimes say the word nana, and I can see her lips moving. And then if I don't understand what she's saying, she'll move on to sign language. And sometimes she doesn't produce the sign correctly. And then she'll just grab my hand and take me to a banana so I can see what she is asking for. At school, though, she doesn't want to touch things. She doesn't want to be tactile because it's not the right environment for it. And if she's saying just nana, it's not enough for them to understand what she's trying to communicate. It's funny that the school is looking at her language skills and saying that they're just okay, but as a deaf-blind parent, I think her language skills are great. And so there's definitely some myths there that come from perception about what is appropriate and what is standard. As people with disabilities, sometimes we need to change perceptions. We need to tell people that what they think is incorrect and make people see things from a different perspective. And so that really levels the playing field for us as people with disabilities. And I want to make sure I mention that.
This is Lisa. I can add something. I think that myths in general, really, it's just ignorance. It's lack of exposure. I think that people aren't always the most open-minded. I know that Dr. Lester mentioned that this is a place to learn and a place to finally gain that exposure. I think it's great that we learn something new every day. As long as we continue looking at the world with an open mind and an open heart, that's the best way that we can accept new information. So when people with a disability, especially people with hearing loss, communicate their needs or offer what the best communication approach is for them, it's important to believe them. It's important to be open to that. So for example, I've been in situations where like I would go into a fast food restaurant. This is of course before phones and texting. And I would go into a fast food restaurant and go up to order and kind of gesture for a paper and pen. And next thing I know, they're bringing me out a Braille menu. I didn't ask for a Braille menu. I'm sighted. I don't even know Braille. I just want a hamburger, right? So when assumptions are made about accommodations and people don't believe you when you ask for what you need, that are myths that need to be addressed. Right now, it's easy with technology. We can just type in our phone and show them the phone, but I think that's important to mention. And making sure to not only keep an open mind and an open heart, but also be accepting of people with differences and again, believe them and follow their lead on what they need.
I'd like to add that I also think that the myths persist due to lack of information and exposure. I've had several jobs over the years, and I believe that on most of those jobs that I've been offered a job or I've actually started to work at those places, there has been at least one person that has some exposure to somebody with hearing loss or deaf. And that was in that group of persons that took a decision to recommend me or for that job. And it's really amazing when somebody understands what a disability is or is exposed to it, how their perception it changes. And what we want is that more people understand and educate themselves about working or being around and giving opportunities to all persons. Thank you.
Excellent point, all of you. The reason I chose the three of you for this panel is because you are leaders in your communities, as I am as well, and as the Arizona Commission for the Deaf and the Hard of Hearing, a small state agency in existence since 1977, serving a population in Arizona with about 7.5 million people, but about 1.1 million of them are hard of hearing, like me and Minerva. So people know people who are hard of hearing. They don't necessarily know somebody who's deaf or deafblind because they're smaller populations. But we want people to get to know, yeah, great, thank you. Get to know us a little better. And one of the things we talked about was obviously diversity, equity, inclusion. We've talked about adding this A as a community, adding the A in. So it's not just diversity, equity, inclusion, it's also accessibility. So not just DEI, but DEIA. And we have a question from the audience for Andrew. It's really about accessibility. And they want to know, Andrew, what is the person behind you doing?
This is Andrew. It's a fantastic question. The person behind me is working as a support service provider, or SSP. We now use a term co-navigator in place of SSP. It's a newer term. His role is to provide me with information that I cannot hear or cannot see by giving me information through my back. Now, when people are talking, he will indicate the direction in which the person is speaking so I know which way to look. When people are laughing, he does a signal on my back that indicates people in the audience might be laughing. He's providing me with environmental information through a series of signals on my back to help me keep up with you. And that's how I'm so quick with my responses. It's great to have a support or SSP or a co-navigator. The commission does offer SSP or co-navigator services to any individual who is deaf-blind or has a combined vision and hearing loss in the state of Arizona. So I want to mention that I appreciate ACDHH for providing that.
Thank you for providing that information, Andrew. And also thank you for one of the things that wasn't in your bio, but that Andrew was appointed by the governor to be one of the commissioners on the board of commissioners that oversees this agency. And so we really appreciate Andrew's participation on the commission board and his insight into the issues that affect us as a state agency and as a population of over 1.1 million Arizonans. So there you go. And we have an audience here clapping as well. So, and his SSP has also told him that. So, okay, we've got another question.
We can move on now. We can move on. We can move on.
All right, I'm gonna make him blush.
On with the show.
So, I have another question here. To what extent does your personal background, shaped by your intersecting identities, influence your advocacy or your activism efforts within the communities you represent?
This is Lisa. I can answer that. I had mentioned earlier that I was born deaf, and I had never really experienced, a great deal of oppression growing up. I went to a deaf school and had free communication. Unfortunately, in that deaf school, we focused on oral training, which means we didn't sign very much. But I did have exposure to what's called total communication, which is oral training and sign. Once I went to Gallaudet University, I had a lot more free and ease of communication. But I do remember a time when it was difficult to get interpreters, when the ADA law was not that known. I remember playing basketball, and I never had any issues with getting interpreters for any of the games or tournaments that we went to. It wasn't until later that I really faced that for the first time. Having those struggles really led me to wanting to become a community leader and become an activist, because I know what it's been like struggling for those communication rights. I do also understand that you have to pick your battles. I worked at a retail store a long time ago. I was the only deaf employee there, and I felt a little like maybe it was tokenism, if I'm being honest. I had to make a decision to find a different job where I could be appreciated and valued for my skills and my knowledge, and decided not to fight the battle against my perceived tokenism at that other job. It was important for me to find an environment for me to work that was deaf friendly. I've had to advocate for my mother as her health has been declining. We've had lots of issues with providing interpreters for her medical appointments. Oftentimes, medical offices will try to use video remote interpreting, which is like an interpreter on a screen. That doesn't always work and isn't always appropriate. So I have to fight a lot for live in-person interpreters. And I think it's important that I keep fighting that fight, because every time I can educate someone and every time I break down those barriers, that is paving the path for future generations of deaf people who don't have to fight that fight.
Andrew here. We kind of have opposite experiences. I was born into a hearing world. I experienced barriers and frustrations from day one. Now, my parents kind of taught me that the world was not made for me. They taught me that it was my responsibility to figure out how to make my way in the world and how to make the world work for me. And so they taught me that no one's going to be there to help you along the way, every step of the way. You need to make sure that you understand your role as a self advocate. Starting at just 1 or 2 years old, they were doing this with me. And it's funny that it's just so ingrained in my DNA at this point that I'm just an advocate at all times. Whenever I go into a deaf friendly environment, it kind of feels weird to me. It throws me off a little bit. I'm like, oh, wait, no one needs to be here with me. No, I don't need a co-navigator. I don't need my wife here with me. That's what I experience in the real world. So it's when I get into a deaf space, I feel comfortable and it's where I can do what I need to do. And thinking about my job, I'm the only deaf blind person and we have no issues. We always figure things out. We communicate. I lead my team with the use of an interpreter. I don't have an SSP or anything. I use technology and we make it work. So it's kind of funny that Lisa and I have opposite experiences, but I wanted to make sure I mentioned that.
This is Lisa. Really, we're blessed to have the technology that we do today that really has provided more opportunities for deaf and deafblind people than we did a generation ago.
Absolutely.
In my Can you hear? Oh, yes. The use of assistive listening devices has helped me understand better, to the point that many persons, when they meet me, they don't see that I am hard of hearing. Rather, until they visually see my hearing aids and now my cochlear implants, is when they realize that I have hearing loss. And one of the comments that they make, you do not look like you are have hearing loss. And what I say is because I have at my hands all these devices and technology that helps me. It doesn't mean that it cured me. It has not. It's just something that it helped me heal better. And at any point, I am at risk of missing something.
Yeah, it reminds me of when I've been hard of hearing all my life. My hearing loss is hereditary, it's progressive, which means it gets worse over time. And so when I was little, it was very mild loss. A mild loss in a child is not something we ignore, but when I was growing up, it wasn't even identified. And it really wasn't until I joined this state agency in 2007 when the executive director, Sherry Collins, said, I want you to go to the Hearing Loss Association of America National Convention. And I walked in, and there were literally hundreds of people just like me using microphones, assistive listening devices, saying, what, say that again, getting in each other's faces. And I cried. I got so emotional because I'm like, these are my people. I mean, because we're just not always hanging around each other, right? I go home, nobody's hard of hearing. So it's just really emotional when we finally connect with our communities. Lisa growing up deaf of deaf, Andrew growing up not having that deaf experience. It's just, it's really interesting. So, well, I guess what I'm wondering is a little bit more about what are some of the challenges or the benefits of having this invisible disability? Like, is there a privilege to it? Is there a disadvantage to it? What do you think about that?
This is Andrew. I can tell you one thing for sure. Oh, where is it? I have my white cane here in my hand. When I'm at the airport, or if I'm at the mall or the grocery store, I always have my white cane extended and people get out of my way, just like Moses parting the Red Sea. I can make my way through the store, through the airport. People are like, oh, no, go, you're good, go. Now, if people accidentally bump into me and then or if I accidentally bump into someone, excuse me, then they see my cane, they're like, oh, I'm so sorry, I'm so sorry. They start feeding me grapes, apologizing for everything they've done to me in my life. So that is definitely one of the privileges I experience having my white cane. Now, of course, there are some challenges that come with being a person who is deafblind. People oftentimes don't give me opportunities because they assume that because I'm deafblind, there are things that I can't do. And so it takes some time and convincing sometimes to show people that I am capable of doing things that they think I can't. Disability is great, and there are times when it can be a challenge, just really depending on the situation that I'm in.
This is Lisa. I feel like I have maybe two different categories that I can speak to. Not only being deaf, but also being in the LGBTQIA community. So a privilege that I have is that I can walk through a crowd and no one has any idea that I'm deaf unless I'm signing, right? There's nothing that identifies me as a deaf person. Another privilege is when you're traveling, you know, if you're in the airport and you want to board the plane early, you guys usually need to pay for it, but deaf people don't need to. They let you on right away. It's made for people with disabilities and senior citizens, military, right? They all get on first. And I don't necessarily have a physical disability, but I'm still considered disabled, so I get to get on the plane early. Now, there is good reason for deaf people to get on the plane early. We need to understand our surroundings. We need to make sure to have some clear communication to understand any kind of emergency situations or what have you. But I don't have to wait to get on a plane. I don't have to wait in any of those lines. That's definitely a privilege. There are some privileges also with employment, with work. One of the dreams that I've always had is to work with people with vision disabilities excuse me, the interpreter error. I would love to see people with those kinds of disabilities at the tops of companies, like as CEOs. You really do have to fight and educate every step along the way to get the accommodations that you need. You have to know the law inside and out. You have to be able to cite it. You have to convince people and fight with people. And it does cause a lot of trauma. So there's always going to be that fight. There's always going to be those barriers. And you have to educate and re-educate over and over and over again. Now, as far as being in the queer community, I can tell you that whenever I was going to Gallaudet, when I was living in Virginia, the DMV area, the DC, Maryland, Virginia area, they had a huge LGBTQ community that was very active. We got together constantly. We had social events, and I mean, it was a very, very active community. When I moved back home to Tucson, though, it really wasn't the same. I mean, I don't know if it was the political climate or, you know, maybe the gay community is just smaller in Tucson than it is back east. But being part of that community felt like a privilege when I was in a large and active community back east, but it didn't feel like a privilege when I moved to Arizona. One thing that I did want to add about myths, I had worked as an outreach coordinator all over Arizona. And I would often get encountered, I would have to travel all over Arizona as this outreach coordinator, and people constantly were saying, "Oh wow, how did you get here?" I drove here. People did not understand that deaf people can drive. So the National Association for the Deaf was established in the 1880s because deaf people weren't permitted to get car insurance. And even without the new technology, deaf people have been better drivers than hearing people statistically. We have excellent peripheral vision. We are not easily distracted. Hearing people are distracted by all kinds of things. Y'all are on the phone, you're listening to music. There's all kinds of things that you guys distracted by. Well, now with technology, maybe we're a little distracted. Deaf people are a little distracted on phones as well. I'm not going to lie, but deaf people are excellent drivers. That is definitely a myth that I hope to dispel tonight.
You know, I can't come up with a privilege. I don't know why. But I have been asking, how is it that you have a job? And I'm like, really? I've been doing the same type of job and same type of career for the last 30 years. I'm really good at it. I love my job. What else is needed for that?
Okay, thank you. I think and I think the main disadvantage for me to be hard of hearing and for the hard of hearing consumers that we serve here at ACDHH is that lack of accessibility. You can do all the DEI you want, but without the accessibility, we're not going to be able to access the world. The built environment is fairly accessible for people who use wheelchairs, mobility devices, although they still encounter barriers. But the communication environment is not there. My team member Christy has scheduled doctor appointments and asked for part captioning, and come to her doctor's appointment to find an ASL interpreter. So hard of hearing people, I find that people assume we're deaf. We say we need something and they just assume that we need an interpreter. But I don't think you're fluent in sign language. I can express myself better in sign than my receptive skills. So I think for me, it's just that constant struggle of asking for accommodations. And like with a drive-through restaurant, I'll just place my order in advance instead of having to go back and forth on that speaker that I can't hear out of. And in America, we drive with the wheels on the left side, right? You drive up to the speaker. So my left deaf ear. So I'm like, I can't see your face. I can't remember your order is. So I just placed the order in advance, which is nice. But those are some challenges. But I do think being able to board on the plane is an advantage. It's really helpful because I need them to know in case of an emergency or something, I need them to know that I cannot hear. I can understand what they're saying. We're diverting to this airport, get off at this gate, your gate changed for your change of plane. So they need to know that I have that situation and need to communicate with me. It's 7:05. We're going till 7:30, and we have a question in the back of the audience here. So we want to take a question from somebody in the crowd.
I have a question. I retired about 3 years ago and looking to go back into the workforce. I am not certain if I should indicate on my application that I have a disability and if that would work against me when I go to my interview. Should I disclose it or not?
This is Minerva. I would always personally recommend to disclose it. because a lot of us feel that we're hiding something and we can't be ourselves. So when we disclose it, it allows us to be ourselves and show them the real person. Now, there are laws that protect us. I believe Michelle can talk a little bit more about that.
Yeah, I am not a lawyer. This is not legal advice, but you do not have to disclose that disability up front. You can choose to. Fortunately, it's kind of a worker job market right now. There's 30 people applying for one opening. But it's risky, and I know that deaf and deafblind may have a different perspective on that, whether to disclose that up front or not. So I want to see if my panelists have an opinion on that.
This is Andrew. In my experience in the IT world, I would say it's better to be upfront. That way you can filter out which companies are good, which companies are not. If they don't want you, that's their loss. But those companies who are interested and want to learn more about you, you know that that's a good place for you to build that rapport, to build your skills with that company. Another thing that I want to say in my experience is that when I'm asked how I like to be accommodated, I usually give a couple of options, and that usually doesn't work. Instead, I have to say, tell me how you run your meetings, how you do what you need to do. And they tell me the setup. Maybe there's a daily meeting where there are 20 people at a table, there's a phone in there. If there's a phone in there, perfect. I can connect through VRS, video relay service. I can make sure that I accommodate their meetings in a way that works for me. That approach has generally helped my employer understand what I need and to know that we can make pretty much anything work. But you have to be upfront, and I think you have to be specific about what you need. But in my experience, it's worked for me. I love the group of people that I work with. They are all extremely accommodating, and we're all on the same page with things. That's just been my experience, though.
This is Lisa. Honestly, I can't hide my disability. It's all over my resume. You see deaf school, deaf teacher, ASL teacher. I mean, it's all right there, right? So there's no hiding. Now, I went to a deaf university. I went to Gallaudet. I went to a deaf school. So I really can't hide any of it. I guess I could redact it, but then there would be black lines all over my resume, and nobody wants that. So, when we're having that accommodation discussion, I agree with all of the panelists up here. It really does have to be a collaborative situation.
Thank you for that. Do we have any? Yes, we have another question in the audience.
Hi, I'm Arizona State House Representative Laura Tarrick. I'm a white woman in her early 40s. I have long red hair and I'm wearing a black suit tonight. Thank you so much for the opportunity to learn and gain perspective. As a state lawmaker, one of the reasons I wanted to come in here is, are there things we can do from a policy perspective? Of course, funding is always helpful, but outside of that, what would be helpful to the community? And are there opportunities that we can take as lawmakers to educate ourselves further and learn so that when we are crafting policy, we are mindful that it's as inclusive as possible?
Thank you, Representative, for that question. Panelists, how would you like to respond to the Arizona State House of Representatives?
This is Lisa. I'm happy to respond to that. I'm very glad that you're here. It would be amazing to work towards having equal access everywhere, including communication access. I think it's important to provide whatever accommodations are needed, and have some kind of consequence for not providing those accommodations. It is not a deaf person's responsibility to provide those accommodations. It's the business or the hearing person, whoever is providing that service. I think it's important to remember that hearing aids and cochlear implants does not make a person hearing. We should have options. We need options.
This is Andrew. The first thing that comes to mind for me is to review policy every couple of years. And the reason I mention that is because the world is changing at such a fast pace and technology is morphing right in front of our eyes. Sometimes policies aren't changed and policy can become a barrier for us because people cite laws and rules that become a barrier for us because laws and rules haven't been addressed to stay current with our current needs. That's one thing that I definitely would mention. And the first thing that comes to mind with the deaf-blind community is that we're generally not recognized as a group. There's the deaf group, there's the hard of hearing group. The deaf-blind group generally does not get any recognition, but we have unique needs. We need unique services. Policies and laws generally don't address our needs, which creates more challenges for us as a community. If those policies and laws and rules are reviewed regularly to be inclusive of all individuals and all communities, I think that would be great. That's a recommendation that I have.
We have another.
I would also like to add also about disclosing your deafness, like I am deaf. My field is a graphic design field, and I show my portfolio, and they can't tell I'm deaf, but they need to be able to see this, that when they see me, they need to see my skills first. And so when I call through Relay, I don't use through email. I disclose to them first that to the interviewer that I need this accommodation. I said, please give me a chance to show you my portfolio. And once we meet, I can explain. So usually they're good with that. I show them my portfolio, and then they would start asking me questions on how to communicate with me. What do I need? Do I need an interpreter? So I do tend to disclose, but I don't do it the first thing. I want to explain my skills first.
This is Lisa. I think that somebody had stood up and maybe has another question. I think that they may have overlapped.
Yes. Good evening, and thank you very much for my invitation to be here. My name is Dr. Laura Metcalf, and I am a candidate for Maricopa County Superintendent of Schools. And I am looking to not turn this into a political issue. It is not, but I am looking to add services to this office to reach out to the deaf and hard of hearing and deaf-blind community. And I am interested in knowing what services that this office may be able to provide this community.
This is Lisa speaking. I really appreciate you being here and asking about services that are provided. I think from an educational perspective, the most important thing is that parents need to be educated about the choices between mainstreaming their kids and sending them to a deaf school. And that actually leads to the lawmaker who's here. I think an important thing to recognize is that ASDB, the Arizona State Schools for the Deaf and Blind, need to be kept open. There's been a lot of very complicated issues and some hot button topics about that school. It absolutely needs to be kept open. It's vital for this community. And ACDHH has lots of information and resources that they can provide if you have more questions about either of those issues.
This is Andrew signing here. Now, this is an issue in the deaf community, especially when it comes to deaf children. And I could be wrong, but this is how I understand the issue. From birth to 3, if someone is identified as deafblind, then that person will be tracked. After the age of 3, that tracking, though, stops and those children can fall through the cracks. At the age of 21 is when we start to identify the deafblind community members again. But that gap from the ages of 3 to 21 really hurts the community and really leaves community members out. So it's important that we bridge that gap and make sure that those who are identified, of course, we track them and we track them throughout their entire life. And I don't mean specifically for other communities, but I know that oftentimes this tracking begins and then people lose track of where people are. It's not a cohesive tracking system, but it's important to understand the gaps that occur within a deaf-blind children's life as well. I want to make sure I mention that. And that's for the whole deaf community as well.
Minerva, do you have any response to the representative or Dr. Metcalf's?
Yes, among the services that I believe that are needed is that a lot of adults that have hearing loss sometimes need access or need access and knowledge and be educated about the different types of accessibility services and devices that are out there. I was very lucky to have met a person at the Office of VR, and at that moment, it opened the doors to me of all the services and devices that are available out there. My adult life is really split and before that moment and after, because it opened so many doors for me to be able to incorporate me into the hearing world. And many of them have helped me on that introduction seamlessly into those environments. Thank you.
This is Lisa. I wanted to make one more comment to the representative who is here. It would be great for the state of Arizona to change language in their current laws so that it shows deaf, hard of hearing, and deaf blind instead of hearing impaired. The United States started that a few years ago. They passed a law. Excuse me. Interpreter error. The Utah actually was the first state to go back through all of their records and find all of the uses of the words hearing impaired and change it to deaf, hard of hearing, and deaf blind. I think that Arizona should follow suit and look at their laws as well. The change of that term, the change of that label really has an impact on how our communities are viewed and it's a more honorable and respectable term.
There's a question from the audience.
Good evening. Hi, thank you for inviting us all to this great panel. I feel like it's a privilege to learn from each one of you up here tonight. My name is Judy Robbins. I'm a former retired educator through Arizona State Schools for the Deaf and Blind, locally Phoenix Day School for the Deaf, as well as Mesa Public Schools. I am also a sign language interpreter and freelance as one right now. I would like to ask the panelists to give their perspectives on a myth that many of us educators have to re-explain to the hearing world constantly about the educational level of most children coming through either the schools for the deaf and blind or a mainstream program, and how a reading abilities and literacy is a challenge for these children. and why people have always a question about why they can't read and write after 21 years in schools. And I'd like you to address that, to talk about what impacts literacy, the issues of language and communication has on literacy specifically, and how that could actually be dispelled, that deaf people can do anything except for hear, or deaf and blind people can do anything except hear and see. But literacy is a barrier constantly. And if you could address that, thank you.
I can't jump in here at this point.
This is Lisa. Sure, I can try my best. There are many different educational philosophies and causes for what Judy was just describing. The most prevalent is called language deprivation. Now, parents, many of whom are hearing, who have a child who is deaf, hard of hearing, or deafblind, are not provided with all of the resources that they need. Now, historically, when a baby is born with hearing loss, the first exposure those parents have is the medical view of deafness, that that child is broken, that that child needs fixed, and that that child should learn to be as close to a hearing person as possible, that they should not sign. That they should not sign, that they should learn to try to speak, that they should rely on their listening skills, that they should try to speech read. Now, studies again and again have proven that that is not effective. So it's important to provide not only medical providers, but also parents with all of the resources about looking at their deafness, not only through a medical model, but through a cultural model as well, so that they know that there is a beautiful language and a culture and a community that is ready to welcome that family into the world. Now, deaf schools have had a hard time with funding. The deaf students who go into mainstream are often just pass through and fall through the cracks. There are so many different entities that are involved in the education of a deaf child that it's difficult to finger point at just one. But language deprivation is certainly one of the biggest reasons why deaf students have a hard time with literacy, and the education system doesn't know exactly what to do with them as far as English literacy is concerned. Andrew, did you have, or Minerva, do either of you have something to?
This is Andrew signing. Lisa is absolutely correct. In my experience, people don't know what they don't know. That's normal, right? You have no real reason to learn about deafness or someone who's hard of hearing, maybe until you have a child yourself who is deaf or hard of hearing or deafblind. That's normal. Unfortunately, our system is not prepared to provide families with resources. Parents get the first information from a doctor, and a doctor sometimes might be on their laptop in the room with the parents Googling deafness and just kind of giving them resources that they're finding willy-nilly on the internet. And that's also normal. You can't blame them for not knowing what they don't know. And it's impossible for a doctor or a provider to know everything. And that's why it's important for us to use technology to help us fill in those gaps. And that helps families realize that resources are out there. One thing that I'm keeping a close eye on is artificial intelligence. It's going to change everything that we do. And oftentimes I have an AI thing who's like, hey, by the way, did you know? By the way, did you know? And it gives me these alerts all day. AI is changing everything. I can't even imagine what things are going to look like in 3 or 10 years from now. I think everyone's life is going to see a serious improvement, people with disabilities and people without disabilities. So yeah, we're gonna see how things go.
This is Lisa. Can I add something? I think that the early intervention program is of utmost importance. When a hospital detects hearing loss in a child, they should be the very first phone call to come and meet with the parents and immediately become their mentors. That is the organization that should be teaching those parents about communication, about raising a deaf child. We are not going to do anything different than what a hearing parent is going to do with a hearing child, except for the language. We have to remember to make eye contact. We have to remember to make our world more visual. If it's a deafblind child, we have to learn how to use tactile signing. So it's something that needs to be started immediately at birth with those families and not something instituted at a later time.
So we've got just a few more minutes here for this actual panel presentation. And of course, and this is something that Dr. Lester always says, we could continue this conversation for quite a while. And that's what it's all about, is talking, listening, and connecting. I do want to just give us a couple minutes just to kind of sum up just that one last thing that you want the public to know about you and the communities that you represent.
So this is Minerva. For me, I want the public to know that accommodations matter. They make a difference for the person and for their community and the persons that are around. Thank you.
This is Lisa. I think my last comment is that we are human. Remove the labels and see us as human beings. We can do everything you can do. We should care about each other. We are a community together. We need to work together. Yeah.
Andrew signing here. Thinking about the holidays, we are all snowflakes. We are all unique. We are all individual. Meeting me as one deafblind person doesn't mean that I'm going to be like every deafblind person that you meet. That's one thing that I want you to keep in mind, is to not jump to conclusions. Just understand that everyone that you'll meet will be a little bit different.
Well, just a big shout out and thank you to the panelists for participating tonight, each as private citizens. Lisa driving up here from Tucson. I really appreciate that. And again, all the tech support from ASU. Dr. Lester, did you have any last statements that you want to share with us tonight?
Well, certainly nothing profound except a thank you to every single person who has come out to be part of this conversation. And I'm reminded that we have this hand over here behind Andrew, and it's a hand of many people moving in a direction. And our little tagline for that is talking, listening, connecting. And we can talk in different ways, we can listen in different ways, but ultimately I hope that the talking and listening that we do allows people to connect. But that hand means separate as the fingers, yet one as the hand. And this could not happen without all of these folks coming together. The people from the Arizona Commission, the panelists, the interpreters, the cart person, the videographer, the people who are there on Zoom, and you being here. Project Humanities has been doing this work, and not everybody seems to be excited about it, but we're willing to go into spaces where people don't go into. But I think part of that means that we have to know people who remind us that this is work that we all need to be engaged in. So I am so overjoyed by the learning that has taken place, and you've also made it fun. You have made it fun. Sometimes hard topics, people just think that they leave and they're just, but I just feel so enlightened by this conversation, and it was joyful. So thank you for letting us know that we can learn and be joyful and challenge us to do more so that we can all be more. So I can't thank you enough, Michelle, and your whole team of people here for welcoming us into your space in order for us to talk, to listen, and to connect. And, if you're on the social media stuff, do all that stuff. Michelle is continually holding me accountable. Find people who will hold you accountable so that we can all do better to be more inclusive and more accessible for everybody. So beyond DEI, make it all about accessibility too. So thank you, thank you, thank you. There is a feedback form, so make sure that our panelists and our interpreters are also get an opportunity to do that, because we do learn from your feedback. So thank the people on Zoom, Christy, Ricky, and all those folks who have been part of this, and the wonderful leader in blue. Thank you so much. And thank you for your grace as we were trying to move through this with as much ease as we could. So thank you, thank you, thank you.
And as you're leaving tonight, remember it is dark outside. I don't think it's raining, but do leave together, at least in pairs. Bring your little flashlights and make sure you're safe.
Well, and one more thing, we talk about resources because people always want to know, what are we going to do when we leave here? But there is a wall full of resources. Please take those resources and share those resources with other people who are not here. And we will be sharing some more resources to those who registered, but also you can then share those with those who should have been here, but for whatever reason could not. So thank you, thank you, thank you.